Today's budget forecast shows continued strong economic growth throughout Minnesota, growth that exceeds the nation's. We have the fifth lowest unemployment rate of any state in the nation. Our GDP increase for 2013 of 2.8% was 1 full percent higher than the national average. Compared to the February forecast, the projections of the national economic growth have diminished, and that is a factor in our performance as well. But we still have looking at a surplus of over $1 billion, $1,037 million. That's after transferring an additional $183 million to the reserve fund as prescribed by law. And so we continue to build the reserve. We have a surplus looking into the next biennium for the first time in quite a number of biennia. And it's good news. It means we have to be prudent for sure. I'm not going to get into details of what I would be proposing almost 2 months from now, January 27th, but I said before I'm very interested in the child care tax credit, which would be to remove the income ceilings, be about 137,000 more Minnesota families would be able to take advantage of that credit, and it would cost about $175 million for the biennium. I'd also like to increase state support for the broadband expansions, so we can put more of the Minnesota up into the high-speed network, which is going to be crucial for economic vitality all over the state in the decades to come. Increase the early childhood scholarships. And finally, and it's not reflected really directly in this cash budget forecast, but transportation funding, increasing that, roads, bridges, highways, and public transit. So all in all, it's good news, and we'll have plenty to talk about when the legislature comes back in January. Glad to answer questions.
Are you calling this a surplus, even though you can use inflation, factor that in, and pretty much a status quo?
Well, when there's more money in projected revenues than there are projected expenditures, I call that a surplus. I don't know what else other terms used. When there's less revenue than there's spending, I call it a deficit. I think that's common nomenclature, right? You can attribute it one way or another, and but this is the way that I've described other budgets for the last 4 years, and so I don't see any difference between them. If you include inflation, yes, it evens out. If you include, there are all sorts of different approaches to it, but this is pretty standard.
Governor, are you willing to say that the last 4 years of you as governor is responsible for this surplus, that the state has come out of the recession now because of what you and the legislature did?
I think we contributed to the economic stability and the economic growth in Minnesota. I've said all along that I think the people of Minnesota deserve the credit for our economic performance, for the fact that it's one of the leading states in the nation, that the entrepreneurs and business executives who made decisions to locate or expand in Minnesota, and they're hardworking employees, well-educated, and many of them in the Minnesota school system who have made those investments pay off for those companies and for their own families. That cumulative effect is why we have a 3.9% unemployment rate and fifth lowest in the nation, and why we have this continued growth. That's the main element behind our economy and the main element behind our success so far. I think the investments that we've made in particularly education, from early childhood all the way through higher education, is definitely be a factor. I think if you look at what we need to do to continue that kind of economic growth, is to continue our focus on education, and it's also revitalize our transportation network, because without a good transportation system, a lot of companies, especially those in greater Minnesota, who have longer distances to transport their goods or products, are going to be filling that squeeze increasingly in the years ahead. So those are the roles the government can play in terms of really contributing to economic growth. I think the record shows we've done that, and we'll continue to do so.
Governor, there are those who will say that there's no reason for any sort of revenue increase in transportation, however that might play out, given the size of this surplus. How would you respond to that?
Well, now we have a number to work with, and now those that have been talking rhetorically about this, that, and the other thing, have a chance to put the dollar signs behind their proposals. And if somebody wants to use this entire $1.037 billion for transportation, to say how they're going to do so and what the effects would be on other programs and services, and if they still maintain that we can get that additional investment in transportation without increasing our expenditures, then time's coming close for them to detail their proposals so we can all see if it's connected to reality.
Might we expect that your proposal would include some sort of revenue increase for transportation?
You can expect that, yeah.
Governor, what's your explanation for the fact that we have slower wage growth in this forecast despite our low unemployment rate? And what should be this policy response to this slower wage growth that we're seeing?
Well, I believe the nation as a whole is suffering from that situation where the economists would say that by the law of supply and demand, with the labor market tightening, the wages should increase. And I'm not enough of a national economist to be able to give you the reasons why, although I think the pressures of globalization and the pressures on companies to keep wages low, and the shift in the negotiating positions of labor and employers are all contributing factors. But we need to provide more opportunities for good quality jobs, better paying jobs, and that will continue to be a goal with investments in higher education and workforce training, there's only so much we can do to directly affect the wages in the private sector, although with the minimum wage increase, we've done what we could at the lower end of the scale, and hopefully that will, among other things, have a ripple effect at other wages at higher levels.
Governor Doug, from your perspective, does this outcome take any general fund tax increase off the table in the coming budget? And do you plan to designate every last dollar of this, or do you plan to leave some aside, knowing that things can change quickly?
Well, I feel good about what we left aside previously. We added $150 million to the budget reserve last session. I proposed a higher number, but I'm well satisfied with that. And the legislature enacted this clause that 1/3 of the surplus goes in. So we're talking about about $350 million increase in the cash flow and budget reserve accounts over the last 2 years. And I think that's very, very necessary, but very good progress. I haven't come to a conclusion yet with the spending levels or where they would be allocated. I certainly don't think that there's any need that I foresee for a general tax increase, except something related to transportation, and that would be more based on the actual uses of the transportation system by those who do. So I would say I don't plan to propose any kind of general tax increase, and we'll see what other ideas come forward. And again, the child care tax credit, another $175 million of tax reduction for middle-income Minnesota families, those with young children.
Governor, does governing in $1 billion, does governing with $1 billion surplus make governing easier now that you're returning to divided government? Does this lessen the chance of a shutdown?
Well, considering that 4 years ago we were looking at a $6 billion deficit, and 2 years later at a $625 million deficit, this looks a lot better than that. And again, just credit the state and to the economic progress we've made. And it's the first time, how many biennium that we've been looking at surplus rather than deficit?
About 8 years ago, the last time we had something.
So, I mean, this is greatly improved territory, but there are always going to be challenges in the session, and we have plenty of ideas for use of this money, and many good ideas, both for tax reductions and for spending increases. So, but I think it should make it more more possible that we will come out of the session on time and without a showdown that we had in 2011, which is certainly something I want to avoid if possible, but to see the amenability on the other side to doing the same.
Governor, are you open to other tax reduction measures in addition to the child care tax?
I'm open to anything. The beginning of the process of the next 6 months will be my pushing out a budget, submitting that, revising that after the end of February forecast, and then of course the legislature coming in with 5 months to develop their own ideas, proposals, and then eventually we'll come through all that with hopefully a collaboration that will allocate from tax reductions, spending increases in the reserve, whatever combination. So I'm open to any of that.
Governor, we're already getting, if not a flood, at least a trickle of news releases from advocacy groups of all sorts of good ideas on how you can spend the surplus. What's your advice to them?
Well, so far the number we've roughed out is some $2.7 billion of additional spending for various programs, and many of them very, very worthwhile needs, and many of them ones that both members of both parties have identified: the nursing homes, the personal care attendants, their financial situations, broadband statewide, transportation may be a difference, but I think many would agree that we need to do something to improve the quality of our roads and highways, particularly in greater Minnesota. So, there are a lot of compelling needs out there, and they're going to add up to considerably more than $1 billion, but people should start with what they want, or what they think they need, and we'll go from there. But we obviously have that, we're working within that parameter.
Governor, nationally, high student loan debt is keeping young buyers from the real estate market, and that's an economic headwind that was mentioned in today's forecast. What can the legislator do in terms of policy to help with the burden of high student loan debt?
Well, one is to increase financial aid in dollars, as we did last session. The largest increase in, I believe, any year at all, but certainly first increase in student aid for quite some time. The federal government needs to follow suit so that it's not all loans and more loans for most students and their families. Absent that, and absent the additional institutional support, which has declined in Minnesota from 1981 to 2012, which also puts pressure on higher tuition, therefore higher student costs. And this is basically economics. The money has to come from somewhere, and especially with MNSCU, it's either the state appropriation or it's tuition. The university has a couple of other options with the trust fund and federal research dollars and the like, but basically it's a pretty simple equation. And when you look at see that in 2012, that fiscal year, our state support for higher education was the lowest it's been in real dollars since 1981. It's not surprising then that the pressures on tuition during that time were considerably go higher. The other one I think is, I don't know all the details, but Senator Franken and Senator Klobuchar supports as well of giving students the option to renegotiate or realign their liabilities after they graduate from college. I think is a very good proposal. Okay. Anything else?
General positions around the high school league's transgender policy was passed today?
I don't know the details of the policy, but I applaud the league for taking this on in a very serious, careful-minded way. From what I understand of it, if this is correct, that it's inclusive in a responsible way. I think that they should be. Again, I would applaud them for doing so. I think some of the hate mongering that was going on was just despicable.
Thank you.
I mean, the idea that Clay Matthews is going to change, gender status to go and trample young girls on a basketball court, it's just so I mean, it's ludicrous, but it's not funny because it's so hurtful to kids out there who are struggling with their own identities and parents who are struggling with those challenges, and to think anybody would wish this on themselves or their kids is just absolutely, and that an adult would take a far-fetched, absurd, not even hypothetical possibility and turn that into an attack on trying to help some kids who need a chance to be like every other kid in terms of their school activities. I just can't comprehend how people, some people in this state can want to spend their time on something that's that destructive to other people's lives and misstate it in such a way that is it's really appalling. Anything else? Thank you. Who's next? I think are they coming to report to? They're ready to go? Okay. All right, Linda, you have Linda to thank for the fact you don't have to go back to 19. So I expect Linda to get good press for the next.